Good day everyone, this is Mr. Stitton back again for another instructional video. Now today's video is really interesting. Today we're talking about race paragraph responses. So what do I mean by race paragraph response? Well, I'm going to explain that in just a second, but I want you to imagine for a second that your teacher and you have just read an incredible story. And the teacher wants to ask you an incredible question in the form of a short paragraph response. The way that you answer that response is very important. You can't just answer it. You got to answer it in a very specific way, and Mr. Stitt has constructed a way for you to answer it in the best way possible, and that is through using the acronym RACE. So it's not a race like these ladies are doing here on the screen. We're not going to actually run a race. The acronym RACE stands for something, and that acronym is going to help you remember what to do every time you answer a written response question. So let's jump right into it, and let's talk about a race paragraph response. So what is a race paragraph? Now, when you answer an academic question, you must answer using race. Okay, you don't have to use race, but it's really the best way to get a good grade, especially in Mr. Stitt's class. So if you answer an academic question, so that's a question that requires you to respond with a paragraph or more, you should use the formula RACE. Now here's what this RACE stands for. Number one, you ought to restate the question. That's what the R stands for. Restate the question. So if the question is, what did the character think in the story? You need to restate that question very briefly. You need to say something like, in the story, the character thought. Okay, so you kind of take the question and you rephrase it in your own way and make it into a sentence. The next thing you need to do is you need to answer the question. That's what the A stands for. So don't just restate it, but answer it. Tell your teacher what you think. Yes, no, maybe. What do you think a good answer to the question would be? Next, you need to cite evidence to prove your point. So what evidence from the story are you going to use to prove your point? You need to cite evidence. That evidence gives your answer some credibility. It gives you power, and it gives you, like a lawyer in a courtroom, you can't just say, he's guilty, Your Honor. You have to give evidence to prove why. Last but not least, the E in the RACE paragraph means explain. Explain how the evidence proves your point. You need to not just cite the evidence and be done with your paragraph. You got to explain the evidence. Here's what the evidence means and why. Or this evidence proves that blah, blah, blah. You got to go ahead and explain. So let me restate it. The RACE paragraph, it's a simple acronym to help you with your written response questions. And the R stands for restate the question. The A stands for answer the question. The C stands for cite evidence to prove your point. And the E stands for explain how the evidence proves your point. Now, it's one thing to know the acronym, but let me show you some really good and some really bad examples. So let's start with the bad example, because we've all probably written a written response paragraph like this, and it stinks. So let me show you why it stinks, okay? So later in this year, we're going to read a story called Harrison Bergeron. It's a really interesting story about a man named Harrison who is exceptional, and he's brilliant, and he's smart, but he lives in a society where they don't allow people to be brilliant and smart and amazing. So that is called a dystopian society. We're going to learn what a dystopia is later in the year. But I want you to think for a minute that we just read the story and we're trying to decide, is the society a dystopia or not? Well, here's a question that I would ask you, and you would have to answer in a written paragraph. I would ask you, in the story Harrison Bergeron, do you think the author creates a dystopian society? Explain in a well-written paragraph. Now remember what we just learned. I should be thinking of the acronym RACE to answer my question. But this student did not. This student did everything but RACE. Okay, so let me read their response. Yes, the society stinks and no one is free. The story is very depressing. Okay, so this would be a poor example of a RACE paragraph, a written response. Let me show you why. So I have the acronym RACE there, and I have them color-coded so that you know where the RACE is taking place. Now this particular answer, you'll see they only have the A, or the answer the question. All they've done is answer yes. Okay, you could make an argument that they did C, cited evidence, but they don't really give specific examples. And they certainly don't restate the question at the beginning, and they really don't explain any of the evidence that they give. So they say the society stinks and no one is free, but they don't give specific examples cited from the text, and they don't really explain that evidence at all. So this would be a poor example. Now let me show you a fantastic example. So same question up above. In the story Harrison Bergeron, do you think the author creates a dystopian society? Explain in a well-written paragraph. Look at what the student wrote. In the story Harrison Bergeron, the author absolutely creates a dystopian society. Evidence to prove this is the fact that the government officials, including the handicapper general, attack Harrison and keep him in a state of constant panic. These individuals oppress the people in the story. They are never truly free. This evidence proves that the society is a dystopia because a dystopia is a place where only squalor, fear, and depression exist. Wow, now that is a great example. Let me show you why, though. So same thing as before, I have the RACE acronym highlighted there for you. Red is the R, blue is the A, green is the C, and purple is the E. Now let's break it down. They certainly restate the question. Look at the red. In the story Harrison Bergeron, the author absolutely creates a dystopian society. Now in this restatement of the question, so they're taking that question above and they're reforming it into their first sentence. That's a restatement. Then they're actually answering in the restatement. They say absolutely. So I've highlighted that in blue for you. Absolutely. So they believe it is a dystopian society. Now, look at all the evidence they provide, highlighted in green. They give specific examples from the story. They talk about the government officials. They talk about the handicapper general, who's like the president of this crazy world. They talk about how they are putting Harrison in constant panic. Next, they talk about how they oppress the people, which means how they choke them and make them feel terrible and things like that. Last but not least, they're explaining in the last sentence how this evidence proves it's a dystopia. So they don't just cite evidence, they explain how the evidence proves it's a dystopia. So they kind of retell you what a dystopia is. It's a place where only squalor, fear, and depression exist. And based on the evidence of how they oppress the people, this absolutely is a dystopian society. So, as you can see, the two different examples, the first one really didn't do anything other than answer the question. This particular example is a wonderful example from one of my students where they restate the question, answer the question, cite evidence, and explain how the evidence is important. This would get 100% on a written response test of some sort. So, let's review before we're done today. What is a RACE paragraph? Remember, when you answer an academic question, you must answer using RACE. You must first R, restate the question. Then you must A, answer the question. Then you must C, cite evidence to prove your point. And last but not least, E, explain how the evidence proves your point. Well, I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope that you can remember to RACE every time you answer a written response question. This simple acronym will help you score highly on any written response question. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.